Well, yes, we are live now. Good morning to everybody who is with us. We are on LinkedIn, YouTube, Clubhouse, and Facebook this morning again, and it is a pleasure to welcome you, who are watching us, and also to welcome our today's speaker, Andrew James. So this is the first time we have Andrew with us. Tim and I are pleased to say once again, to say welcome, Andrew. And just for a couple of seconds, let me introduce you briefly here. So Andrew is, an American who has settled in Japan, and he works in private capital research and also alternative assets. But however, today we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about something that more people find challenging. Sometimes it is enjoyable, sometimes it is not. We're going to talk about what it means to get established in Japan, because we know that the Japanese society sometimes builds barriers, but sometimes it welcomes you with open arms. And of course, there are always not just challenges, but also advantages and disadvantages. So, Andrew, without any further ado, I want to invite you to start and just briefly introduce yourself, and from there we'll dive into the points that you have prepared for us today.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I've always wanted to have an opportunity to speak with other people who've been in Japan just about as long as I have, or longer than I have. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. So my name is Andrew James. I'm originally from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I came to Japan in 2015. My connection to Japan is very like many. I grew up around the early 2000s where Cartoon Network kind of had that sort of anime boom, and that kind of caught me at a very, impressionable age. I grew up watching all the classics, Dragon Ball Z, the Yu-Gi-Oh, all that fun stuff. I didn't really think it would lead me to Japan, but I always sort of had that interest. And then when I got to college, I was actually an English major. I took a course in English, and I was like, well, I kind of don't need this since I already speak English. But I decided to look into some other courses, and I saw that we had Japanese as an option. And I was like, okay, let's see where this takes us. And yeah, to say it was the bug that bit me was an understatement. I kind of just followed that rabbit hole down. I ended up studying abroad for 1 year, my junior year, where I went to Nagoya University of Foreign Studies. And yeah, I actually fell in love with it all over again. I think what actually wanted me to pursue, the language and the culture even more was that I got an opportunity to see our translator, his name is Blair, work in action and actually help people who may not be familiar with the language and the culture make their lives a lot easier in Japan. And like I said, that just made me want to study the language even harder. I ended up graduating with the N2. I ended up getting my N1 not too long afterwards, and I was like, yeah, I want to be a translator. Until I became a translator, well, or an interpreter rather, and I realized I don't like this at all. But I just,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
was just one of those experiences, one of those never meet your heroes type situations where you actually end up in that interpreting room, and you're like, wow, this is a lot. This is a lot to juggle, and at that moment I was like, well, I think it's better for me to keep my love of the language as a love of the language, and let's try to pursue something else. So I actually forgot to mention, but I was actually on the JET program from 2015 to 2018, where I worked as an assistant language teacher, and I was also did some CIR, so coordinator for international relations type of business deals. So I worked a lot with the Olympics at the time, and I did some translation work and interpretation work for our local city. And then, like I said, I went back to the United States. I was an interpreter for 1 year. I realized this wasn't for me, so I decided to come back and get my degree in my master's degree in Japanese linguistics and cultural studies at the University of Nagoya. And then, yeah, after that, I left and I ended up moving to Tokyo, where I have my job now as a research analyst in private capital and venture capital. So a long road to get here, but it's been a very fun journey so far, and hopefully today what we talk about can help someone out there. That'd be really great from my end. Uh,
Yes. I think that yes, both of you, both of Tim and I actually can relate to your experience and the revelation that translation and interpretation work is really tough and difficult, and it's not for everybody. Because I realized I was never, I mean, before I came to Japan, I was guiding tours and so on. And interpretation, there was something, it came naturally, right? But once you start doing it, as your profession, I realized that it's just not for me at all, even before I started doing that. Because when I came to Japan and started working for one of the Japanese companies, I that are on my resume, and they asked me to interpret and translate, and I was like, "This is not for me, It's just
Mm.
not part of my job description." But whatever. So I can relate very deeply to that discovery.
Yeah,
You
you find it's a
mentioned.
completely different skill set than what you had originally thought going into, especially with interpretation, right? Something that I found out very quickly is that while your job is to be wallpaper, as soon as the wallpaper gets a little bit loud, it's suddenly your fault. So it's it was definitely something that I found was a really big adjustment for myself. Tim, how about yourself when you started doing a little bit of interpreting?
Yeah, well, I never pursued it as a goal for a career, but we've discussed this before. When you work for a Japanese company, you are called upon to do it whether you want to or not.
Mhm.
Just because you're bilingual, they automatically think that you are gonna, jump right in and be really good at it.
Sure.
And I know people who are native level almost in both languages who don't like to do it and don't feel comfortable. But
Mhm.
in my case, and I think it just evolved naturally because of my cross cultural background, I found myself more of a guy who was managing interactions than interpreting.
Mhm.
And, somebody will say, a Japanese person will say something, and you're not exactly sure what they mean. So I would say, hey, could you give me an example so I can better explain it rather than just passing the words and not being sure that I interpreted what he intended to say correctly.
Mhm.
I would, take a little more time and make it more of a dialogue
Mhm.
so I could manage the interaction. And interestingly, people would start calling on me because they said, I don't know why, Tim, but things always seem to go better when you're in the room, And so while I wasn't a great interpreter, I think I was really good at connecting people. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of the direction I don't even know if there's a word for that skill, but that's kind of where I evolved. Maybe that makes sense. Hopefully it does.
Yeah, it does. So I'm actually a little jealous. I didn't make it that far. I was definitely just like that messenger, just passing along the words, and then if they fight over it, hey, I didn't say it. Don't shoot the messenger, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, but
Well, I used to try not to get them in fights.
Mhm.
So oftentimes you got a frustrated American, you got an angry Japanese guy, and people start saying things that they shouldn't say because all it's going to do is escalate that conflict. And
Mhm.
my job, I always thought if they get in a fight, I can't do my job. I can't connect them. So I would soften the messages.
Mhm.
Some people might say that's wrong, but for me, my goal was to connect them,
Makes
not
sense.
to just send angry words back and forth. And then it accomplishes nothing,
That
right?
makes sense. That makes
So
sense.
I would soften it and try to get them to come to an understanding
Mhm.
rather than just pass these angry words back and forth.
That
That
makes sense.
happened a lot early on.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right.
So,
Yeah, so I guess just to get these things, to get this sort of today started, a little bit of what I wanted to talk about, just what it means to get established in Japan. And I
Yeah.
understand it's a very, very broad sort of subject to sort of touch on. So I can really just, get touched around to my own life and sort of
Mhm.
talk about what I've learned from the last 9 years since I've been here. I would say first and foremost, there's just going to be things you're just not ready for at all. There may be some of your listeners out there who may be in my situation that I was, 9 years ago. I'm 22. I just got my little Japanese degree. I just finished Genki 1 and 2. I'm ready to go, ready to just get out
Right.
here, see what we can make happen. And then, once the Nihongo Josu's, fade, and you've been settled into your life, and you realize, man, what did I just do to myself? Like, I went from a culture and language where I understood everything all the time to a country and language and a culture where I understand some of the things, maybe some of the times. And it's what do you do in that situation? And I think what really helps is really learning how you can make an impact where you are. I guess that's sort of like the first thing. You don't necessarily have to be the most, fluent Japanese speaker ever. You don't have to be this sort of person who just understands everything about Japanese culture. No, you can do a lot with what you have in your hands right now with the tools that you have. For example, I knew a girl that I had came out of the JET program with. She spoke no Japanese at all, but she had this ability to sing, and she had this ability to play the guitar. She did a lot of live concerts growing up. So when she started going to her school, she made her impact by helping out with the music club. She made her impact by putting on concerts for her students. And wouldn't you believe it, she had more fans than these idol groups that you see around Japan these nowadays. So I don't think that you have to be this expert, right? Which is sort of counterintuitive to being 22, because at that age you think you know everything, and you think all you have to do is just apply it. But when it comes to applying things, you hit these roadblocks. And I think the first question that everybody should ask when they move here is, how can I make this impact? Have you guys thought the same thing, or?
Yeah. I, you know, I like to sometimes frame things in extremes to make a point.
Mhm.
And I have met people who are extremely fluent in Japanese who don't have any friends here because they use the Japanese almost as a weapon. Like, just because you know how to say something doesn't mean it's a good idea to say it, right?
Mhm.
And they're not strategic in what they say and how they say it. And
Mhm.
sometimes they have a lot of language ability, but they don't really know enough about the inner workings of the culture to apply it strategically.
Mhm.
Because to me, the only reason for learning Japanese, at first it was to meet the pretty girls because I was a young man, but it's to connect with people, to make friends, to
Mm,
make those human connections. It's a tool, right?
Yes.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, we're probably somewhere in the middle, maybe skewed to the language side a little bit. But on the other end of the spectrum, I know people who don't speak any Japanese, and they have tons of friends
Exactly.
because they're authentic, they're interesting, they somehow have that aura about them. They're respectful, they're kind, they anticipate people's needs and do kind things.
mm,
Some people come here and it just works for them. I call them unicorns,
Mm.
cross cultural unicorns, right?
Right.
So I think sometimes language is a little bit overrated. I'm not saying you should learn it, it's a great tool. But I think understanding the culture and being able to read the air, or read between the lines and connect with people is underrated. I think the
yeah,
cultural angle is often devalued. Yeah.
devalued. Yeah,
Your thoughts?
yeah. I think that I'm entirely agree with what you said, both of you. But I also think that in addition to that, you really have to be humble
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, for
yes,
sure, for
you
sure.
For
know,
sure.
yes, because understanding the culture, and knowing how to use the language, and knowing how to make an impact is important. But if you're not humble, it inevitably conveys, and it translates into your actions and your
Mm.
the words and everything. And so that humility goes a very long way in Japan, and people do not appreciate arrogance here. So I
Yeah,
think that maybe one of the first things that we need to remember is to stay humble and also show respect, which is probably two different sides of the same coin. I don't know,
yeah.
but Yeah.
I would just add, I completely agree with you. And if you're not humble coming into it, if you have even a modicum of self-awareness, you will be
You will,
humbled.
yes, you'll get humbled very quickly, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
just wanted to rerun just really quickly. I know Tim had talked a little bit about weaponizing that Japanese, and you get people who learn the Japanese and they think like, you know, it makes up for a lack of personality. That definitely was sort of my case when I first started studying Japanese. I was like, well, I don't have to necessarily be this social butterfly person as long as I understand this language. And it's actually pretty interesting because, you know, for myself, I had studied the language for 3 or 4 years. You know, I had my N1 by the time I was like 25. I was like, oh, I'm so ready to be around people now. Like I have, you know, the gold ticket. I can do whatever I want now. But that's when I realized I knew nothing about people. And I had this sort of challenge to myself at 25. I was like, okay, now that I have the language and it's not necessarily a problem, how can I connect with people? And that was my second leg of the journey of me being in Japan, learning how to be myself in a room of people that are of a completely opposite culture. I understand the language, but how can I connect in something that is meaningful and something that is beneficial for both of us? And that was like I said, that was the biggest leg of my journey in Japan, and something that I'm still learning to this day. But you had touched on a little bit, Tim, that, you know, for the people who may not have the language side, they have the cultural side. And that was another really big thing that I learned, that people are people no matter where you go. It just so happens that all of our languages are just a little bit different. So find a good way to marry that while also interjecting enough of yourself into these into your everyday interactions, you'll find that your journey here gets a lot easier. So case in point, I was in grad school. I had no money, zero. But I had like I said, the N1. I had was this translation experience. My university reached out to me to do some machine learning language models. So I helped translate some Japanese into English texts, and one that opened the door. So I guess that goes to what we were talking on a little bit, that learning the language opens a lot of doors. I would have not seen that opportunity any other way. But
For sure.
getting into the job, this was my first like job outside of interpreting that didn't involve interpreting or English language teaching. Like, how can I be a person in this new environment, and how can I connect with my office mates? And I found, honestly, just we were talking before, being genuine, being humble, being yourself, knowing when it's okay to not know everything, and knowing when to lend yourself to an experience, but also knowing when to throw your hands up. And what do you do in those two situations? And that was another thing that I learned for myself. Working from home, it was a lot of different stresses going on. It was during COVID. We couldn't leave the house. And I was like, here's something that I thought I knew what was going on this entire time, but now we've been thrown this curveball in life. I don't know what to do.
Right.
You're right. I threw my hands up. I just didn't know what to do. And what do you do in that situation? You learn to reach out. You reach out to other people. And that was another skill that I had learned that I didn't really have to experience while I was in America. Learn when it's okay to throw your hands up, because more often than not even in such an extreme case of COVID, but a lot of people, they move here and they don't know when to recognize when it's okay to not be okay. And they don't know when to recognize what it means to ask for help. And I was definitely in that boat. But life will force your hand sometimes.
I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, the Japanese like, how it is, it's easy. You use the word skill. And I think that's a really good word, because that itself is a way to connect with Japanese people. If you're vulnerable and you ask for help, they love to pitch in and help you. And it's not only as a peer. I once had to coach an American who was in a leadership position in a big Japanese gaishke here. And she did a 360 review. And for the first time in her career, she got a terrible review. And so I interviewed all her not all of them, but a lot of her subordinates. And the one thing most of them said was, she won't ask us for help. We want to help her. We want her to be vulnerable. We like our leaders to be vulnerable, because otherwise, what good are we if we can't support our leader and she acts like she knows everything or won't admit that she doesn't know something? And to me, that was kind of an aha moment. So even the leadership expectations are maybe counterintuitive to how we frame it in our own culture. Or maybe that's off base, but I think being vulnerable has helped me get closer to Japanese people and even my friends.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of appreciation of the human, or what's that, the humanity of people here. So you don't have to show up like that strong and, impenetrable, leader, or, the person that knows it all. Because I think that, yeah, of course, there is a very deep cultural aspect to this. But when you know how to, or when you have to, or when you need to ask for help, when you know how to ask for help, as Tim said, people here love to help, to jump in. And that's when you build bonds, right? You create connections. So it's a beautiful thing. And Andrew, as you said, I think that it really helps when you wonder what to do, and what your next step should be.
Yeah.
So
I think what was the hardest part for me to be able to do that was because, I mean, Tim, you may be able to, agree with this, but us being Americans, us being American men, we're not known to be these, vulnerable, quote unquote, soft people. We're headstrong, we're gonna get it done, hell or high water, like we're gonna make it happen. But again, just being in that situation for myself with COVID, I was like, no, I don't know what to do. The people that in America that could be able to help me, they don't know what to do either. This is a new situation for all of us. Hey, man, I need help. Not to mention
Yeah,
I'm in a foreign country. So
yeah. And again, I think Japanese are happy to help if you reach out to them. And when you boil it down, and there was a concept I studied in college when I was studying cross culture, cultural differences. And in America, we value, quote, independence.
yeah.
And some of that's a myth because none of us are independent. We all, no matter how you slice it, there's no such thing as a self made man. We all came up from an environment where our parents gave us life, all that. But in Confucian thinking, there's this concept of interdependence, which is valued. So you have this value clash of interdependence with independence. And so when you jump into Japan, and I think people crave interdependence, it's part of being a collectivist society, and there's a beauty in it, and there's downsides as well. Everything has it's a double-edged sword. So does that make any sense to you? That like analysis and value differences?
It does, and that's kind of what I was getting back to. My point was saying we're in a culture that is completely opposite of what we know, almost in every imaginable way, right? Down from the language to the culture to the day. I can't think of a time where I was like, yeah, I know exactly what's going on here at all times. So
Yeah, right.
yeah,
and it kind of brings me to my next points about living in Japan. I polled my group chat where a lot of us, we had graduated around the same time. We've all been in Japan around the same time, and I wanted to make sure we hit on this point because I wanted to see where their heads were at. And a really good friend of mine, Jason, he had a point. He said, "Remember where you are, but also remember who you are, and try to strike a balance where both of those can coexist." And I think that's a very difficult thing to do when you're in Japan, right? Because for the longest time, you consider yourself a guest here and you want to be respectful, but at the same time, you have a culture that you come from that is just equally valuable and also holds weight, right? So how do you strike that balance to where you want to get along with everybody and you want to have the interdependence and you want to be able to be vulnerable, but also you have to bring something to the table as well. And odds are what you may bring to the table may be valuable to the people on the other end. Um, So have you guys have any? I just kind of wanted to ask a question, Tim, especially us being American. Have you ever had any sort of situations where, you've had to strike a balance between those two very opposite cultures?
Yeah, well, in fact, and I'm going to do a little plug. I just posted an article on LinkedIn. So if you want to check out my profile, you can find it. And it's basically about finding what I call your cross cultural sweet spot. And I kind of go through my personal process where I came here. I got perfectly I immersed in Japanese culture. This was the early '80s.
Okay.
And so I was studying Japanese. So I was waking up. My roommate was Japanese, and I'd go to school all Japanese, and then I'd go back. My girlfriend didn't speak English, so my whole life was Japanese, and I unconsciously started taking on these Japanese mannerisms. It was by osmosis, where you're bowing your head, the head bob, right? And you're hi, so this net, you're using aizuchi, even in English, which drove my family crazy. Like, Tim, quit interrupting us, just listen, shut up and listen, right? And then I went back to the States in '87, and I was this freak to my American compatriots. Like, who is this weird American guy acting Japanese? It was kind of creepy, right? And when I look back on it, and I gradually had to recalibrate and figure out my own sweet spot. Who is the authentic me? And a lot of us, we don't even know who we are. And I'm still figuring it out. I'm 66 years old, right? But I'm close. And I know it because when I came back to Japan 6 years ago, after 30 plus years in the US, I just felt so comfortable. And it helps being retired because I don't have to put on this fake persona to make everybody think I'm a professional guy. I'm just a retired schmuck now. And I can be myself, right? And I think you got to know who you are, but it's easier said than done. And again, you got to find that sweet spot. So that's my input for what it's worth.
Perfect. Great. And Maya, I wanted to ask you, in your professional life, how did you find striking that balance between where you're from and being in Japanese culture?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it's really interesting because just like Tim, I got to the point where I was immersed entirely in the Japanese culture and Japanese business environment for 20 years. I mean, like, you start from zero and eventually, become like 100% Japanese. I mean, you can see me, I'm, blonde and blue-eyed. And of course, many people don't ever imagine that a Japanese can look like this. And I'm not born in Japan. I was not raised here. But the thing is that my colleagues at work, they would come up and during nomikais, they would say, "Oh, I don't feel uncomfortable with you at all. I feel so comfortable." And to me, it was really a great compliment because, from local people to tell you that they feel comfortable with you, it means that basically you have become one of them. But not just because, I speak the language. My Japanese language is far from perfect, bless you, Tim. But because
a mosquito. I got a mosquito from buzzing because I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but because culturally I was one of them until, like both of you, I realized that it wasn't who I wanted to be. Because yes, okay, I grew up in a different culture. I grew up in a with different let's say ways of expression of myself and so on. So it took me a couple of years to realize that. It took me a couple of years to to gather the courage to leave that place so that I could get back to my original self. And I think that now I have found my sweet spot here.
That's
Because yeah,
It's a journey, right? It's a journey.
process, it's a journey, and so you cannot just jump from one stage of it to the other. Everything is gradual.
Yeah, it all goes in waves when you think about it. I mean, maybe you guys can think of a point in your own life where you've had this, but I've had this sort of every couple of years, I have something that goes on in my life that reminds me that I am not Japanese. I look myself in the mirror and go, "Hey, man, you're the least Japanese person possible, and that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
for example, when I was leaving grad school, this was about a year and a half before I graduated from grad school. I started doing shukatsu, and
Mhm.
just doing job hunting, and I was like, okay, I speak Japanese. I'm this, I'm a good test taker. I have my master's, like, should be a shoe in. Oh my goodness, have you two done shukatsu before? Like doing the whole rigmarole? Oh,
No,
Oh,
I didn't.
I did in a different way because when I came to Japan, I had to find a job, and my shukatsu was actually sending out, I don't know how many resumes to different companies, and all of them came, all the answers were negative. But sorry for that. I never made it to the interview because, I was, of course, 22 years ago, I was not Japanese. I was, I had just married and so on and so on. But please continue. Sorry for that.
no,
Yeah.
no worries. I was just gonna say it was man, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dark Souls, the video game, but it was like that. Like it was just a really, really difficult experience, but having to do that over and over and over. I think I sent like 90, 115 resumes. I think I only made it to like 10 or 15 interviews. Of course, having to get through the really difficult, mind puzzle tests that you have to get through and all that fun stuff. And when it came down to it, I had looked at the financials. I realized at this point I had just gotten married. I wouldn't be able to support my wife on what I would be making. First of all, second, I had this sort of coming to Jesus sort of realization moment. I was like, why am I trying very hard to be Japanese when I'm not Japanese? And what I mean by that is that I realized that I had a lot more to offer, you know, to be that guy, the world at large, I guess, society, as a Japanese speaking American who has a different perspective on how maybe things can be ran or different ideas that I can bring to the table than I would as an American trying very, very, very hard to be Japanese. Like it was just one of those sort of situations where life kind of knocks you upside the head and they go, hey man, like you're not Japanese. And that's fine. You don't have to be 100%. It won't happen. But also you have these tools in these of the trade and this knowledge that you can bring to the table that people may not have seen before. So that kind of changed my perspective on how I could go about looking for work. So I ended up, you know, pivoting, and I started reaching out to Gaishkes, and eventually one landed, and that's where I am now. But how about you guys? Have you guys had any sort of interactions where you were like, wait a minute, like, oh wait, I'm not Japanese?
I came to the realization that I don't want to be Japanese, and I don't mean that as an insult.
Sure.
I have a lot of Japanese friends, and I love them so much, but I also kind of feel bad for them because they live in that pressure cooker.
Exactly.
There's so much pressure in society if you're Japanese, and as a foreigner, I'm outside that pressure cooker.
Right.
And I think it's hard to be Japanese, and it's harder to be Japanese and live in Japan than it is to be a foreigner. Again, I can only speak for myself, a male white guy. It's for me, it's easier, and I have compassion for my Japanese friends
I do too.
who have to deal with all these unspoken rules and conform, and a lot of them have told me, Tim, it's tough being Japanese. So, people who complain about, oh, they'll never accept me. If they do accept you, you might be careful what you wish for. You might not like it if your values don't fit.
Right.
And mine, some of mine fit, but some of mine as an American, the die has been cast, and I am who I am.
Exactly.
So that's my thought on it. I've said it before.
Well, I mean, if you think that it's harder to be Japanese, I think it's much harder to be a Japanese woman. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yes, 100%.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No argument.
Where are these voices coming from, Andrew? Oh, and then I have to be careful. Am I coming out too loud, people? Sorry, in the audience section. I'm trying not to be speaking to the phone.
You're good.
I was told that I'm blowing off somebody's eardrum.
Oh, that was somebody who loves listening to you.
Yeah. So Andrew, so I wanted because just briefly, everybody knows who I am, but I'm this the very loud Japanese woman living in Texas at this moment,
Okay,
and I
Texas.
lived in the States. I'm kind of sort of reverse, role compared to you. Um, so but I think that transitioning to US life is probably easier compared to from US to Japan because American people they're used to seeing people from different culture. That doesn't mean that they accept those foreigners 100%. But like you said, you have this sort of come and goes in phases, and it's sort of you got to the point that you're okay, not fully accepted. And my question is, you just said you got married.
Yes.
By having the family, does it sort of help you? In other words, so family member can be your support system.
Sure.
Is that a good like a turning point, or it just added a plus?
I would say it's more the latter. It was a plus for me. So I mean, full disclosure, before I got married, I was kind of just, wheeling and dealing just by myself, making sort of my life here in the country. But by the time I gotten married, I was already pretty comfortable with who I was and who I am, and sort of like where I sort of fit in Japanese society. But fortunately enough, my wife's family and my wife herself, they're some saints, and they love me for who I am, and they love what I bring to the table. So yeah, I would really consider me being married was more of a plus.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to mention earlier, and this applies to having a really supportive spouse, but also to having just Japanese friends and connections who can kind of be your cultural mentors, because you could read every book on Japanese culture and you're still not going to ever grasp all the nuances of real time living here.
Mhm.
And even now, after 46 years in Japan, I will encounter a situation and my wife will be there, or one of my many Japanese good friends will be there. And I'll turn to them and say, how are you reading this situation as a Japanese, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't all necessarily read it the same way, but they offer insights that I build on a database of experiences that I've had. And it's given, now a lot of it is like ingrained, it's baked in now, where I don't know, I've cultivated a sixth sense.
Right.
But I would have never done that without having these mentors. And my wife's one of them, but not the only one. And I think, and I would say the same, if you ever go into a Japanese company, rather than trying to learn every rule, every unspoken rule, work on building some relationships of trust within the organization and having an advocate who you feel close to, and you have to give as well as take.
Right.
I mean, it has to be give and take, right?
Exactly.
But it's so valuable to have a person within the organization who can, I don't know if mentor is the right word, but who can be your advocate and teach you the nuances that you're, as a foreigner, you're not going to see.
No.
Yeah, that's very important. And also, once again, the trust you build there. So it's so, I mean, it's just irreplaceable. I remembered when, Andrew, when you were talking, about, and Tim as well, talking about when you don't want to be Japanese with, because you respect your Japanese colleagues and, and friends and families. So I remember that I have a very good example, I think, about this, because there was a time when at my previous workplace, they were thinking, about having, let's say a New Year's party so that everybody could network, all the people in the company, plus the member, the people on the board. The board of directors of the company, so they belong to other different companies. So we couldn't, as employees, we couldn't meet them, regularly. So that was a wonderful, opportunity to meet them and talk with them. So the General Affairs Division decided to make it an opportunity, for everybody in the company to meet the board of directors, mingle with them and talk with them and so on and so on. And that was the first idea until just 10 days before the date, they decided that, okay, so unfortunately we cannot, hire, what's that, a catering company. So what we are going to do, we are going to have the women in the company to serve the drinks and be behind the counter. Because the women there were just 4 or 5, and we were only, about what? I don't know what the percentage, but a very small number. And it was the right number, for us to be behind the counter and to serve the drinks for all the men who are going to mingle and talk. And I was like, excuse me, as the only foreigner there, So I was like, excuse me, this makes no sense, right? Because, even the women in managerial positions, they will have to stay, to stand behind the counter and serve drinks. That's not going to work. What's with the idea of everybody mingling, and talking and exchanging ideas and and so on and so on. And then one of the guys there, in the general affairs division, he says, "Oh, Matsuoka-san, yappari gaijin da ne." And I was, yes, I'm happy to be in this situation because it makes no sense, right? So they actually had to change that. And in order to, it's so funny. And I don't think that it was good to go into entirely the opposite direction, but they had, 5 men serve the drinks that night.
Good. Sometimes being the gaijin is good. Sometimes if you judiciously pick your battles,
exactly,
you can do good here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I use Japanese card all the time, especially when I get pulled over by a cop. Just kidding.
I think some foreigners have done that in Japan. I might know one or two,
I didn't know I couldn't turn left here. Just kidding. Okay, anyway.
No, but is that basically, and the story that I told you now is it happened exactly at the same company where everybody told me I feel so comfortable when you are around, right?
Right.
And once again, Tim, yes, what you said, you have to pick your battles and know when and what to fight for. So because it's just and it's a small thing. I mean, that story, it's not really a big battle or whatever, but at the same time, I think that it helped because everybody was talking about equality and so on, and the company was priding itself in offering equal opportunities for everybody, and they came up with the idea, of whatever. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I was gonna say, I mean, I think that's one of the good things that's afforded to us being foreigners in Japan. Like we had that option, right, to be in the pressure cooker as much and as long as we want to be. But as soon as we're like, we have that ability to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So as soon as it's like, I don't know about this, we have that ability to actually speak up and bring another opinion to the table that people may not have looked at. So it's just, how do you use this ability, this sort of superpower, I guess you would say, effectively, and something that can bring about, good change to everybody. I think that's just one of the things that I'm still learning how to do, even 9 years on into my rabbit hole while we're here. But I think that's the other thing I wanted to say, pick up what you want, pick up what you think can add to you, and leave what you don't. That, I guess, is kind of like the other sort of point I wanted to get across about being here.
Yeah.
Like I said, we have this ability to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So pick up what adds to you and see what you can pick up can help bring about a better change to everyone else around you. But at the same time, you don't have to become one, con all, and fully take on everything in that society. And I think that's just like the step in forming who you are in the context of this country, of this culture, and of this language too. So
yeah.
To that point. Okay, go ahead, Maya. Sorry.
Oh no, just I wanted to share some of the comments we got on LinkedIn. But Tim, just after you make your point, because it is exactly to what Andrew just said.
Well, no, I mean, because pick up what you can. I completely agree with everything you say. But I kind of also want to relate it to what you said, Maya, about building trust, right? Building on that, right? How do you build trust? Because a lot of times people have asked me in my seminars, right? And the most important thing is keep your promises. If you say you're going to do something, always do it, right? And if you don't do it, and sometimes we're human, sometimes we break our promises, right away apologize. Don't make excuses. Say, I'm so sorry. You can give them a reason, but say, here's what I'm going to do to make up for it. And again, be contrite about it, right? And then the other thing I would say is, whenever you look for opportunities to add value, to provide something, and sometimes because you are not a Japanese, like Maya did, she added value in a sense, because I think maybe some of the Japanese ladies at that event really appreciated that the foreigner stood up for them for something maybe they quietly perceived was unfair, right?
Sure.
So that's all I got. Let's get to the comments, Maya.
Yes, please.
Great. Yes, the comments. So first we've got one from Hiroko-san. She said, well, good morning. I have learned over my 20 plus years at managerial positions that the importance of being vulnerable. So yes, showing vulnerability again. Yes. And then from Deborah, we've got, I'm very fortunate because my experience has always been with theater people and film people and other creatives. So it's different.
Okay.
Yes. And Timothy Langley wrote, wow, I'm never going to invite Maya to my BBQ. So Timothy, well, that's on you. So
you're lost.
You're invited to mine. Don't worry.
Okay. And then we've got James as well, James Howell. Andrew is the man. Great to see him on the show today. His approach to learning Japanese and integrating into Japan is really motivating for me. James, thank you for this. And thank you for watching. And yes.
And James is killing it too, by the way. James, you're doing really well.
Oh my God.
Hats off to you.
Toastmasters and everything. Man, I'm so proud of him.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
Very much so here as well. So for the moment, these are the comments. But yes, and Tim, thank you for making the points about building trust here. Because, if I can maybe summarize a little bit, it's about showing up and who you are, and also building trust, being humble, showing respect, and of course being bold. But once you have built, that trust, and people know what you stand for, and that you're there for them, not just for yourself, right? Yes.
I always believe in just giving a little bit more.
Question.
Sure.
Go
ahead, Yuka.
Sorry, because I'm not looking at the screen, and it's kind of hard to judge the timing. For the benefit of
Oh, we lost you.
Oh no.
We lost you, Yuka.
Oh, okay, Yuka, go ahead. Can you just please go ahead now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep. Now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I have a question. Just in case, that maybe among the listeners, there's some people maybe, they're thinking about coming to Japan and getting a job, but then, maybe they should do some homework before coming to Japan. But do you have let's say, they get lonely or something, they get lost. I'm sure they have some organization that offer the help, and then also do they, those how you go about finding those organizations? Maybe LinkedIn, or you said that you send out a bunch of resumes. So how did you pick the company? Did you just contact headhunters, or for those people that who are still at the thinking stage? Thank you.
Okay. I just want to say, I think the first step you should do is become a member of Japan Expert Insights and join our groups and network. That as a step one. But then I'll let James take it from there. Andrew James, take it from there.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, first of all, for networking with jobs, I reached out to headhunters. I did a lot of, the same rigmarole of what you do when you go to a job. You go to a job website, you apply through there, you upload your resume, and then you type out the same resume again in the next window, all that fun stuff. Other than that, I think it was a lot easier for me because I was in Japan. So when I got a chance to talk to the recruiters, they noticed that I was in Japan and made my application process a lot easier. So to answer your question, I did a little bit of both. So a little bit of applying directly to the company, and then a little bit of talking to headhunters. And eventually, the headhunter found me my position. But from a personal standpoint, if you find yourself feeling lonely or isolated out here, because it can be a very isolating experience, especially if you're a transplant from a completely different language and culture. I would say the first thing you can do, whether you do it through the internet or through your personal circles, like reach out, network through your hobbies. That's the easiest thing I found to do. Even 9 years, into my journey here, I literally started playing fighting games a couple of years ago, and I went out to my first, tournament yesterday, and I made a bunch of new friends quickly that way.
Nice.
Japanese and American, Japanese and English speaking people. Yeah, you find out people, like I said, we're more alike than we are different. So if you reach out through a mutual like a hobby, it could be the quickest way to make friends that you've or acquaintances that you've never met before. So
Thank
Nice.
you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I
What
agree.
was your hobby? I didn't get that. Sorry. What was your hobby?
Oh, fighting games like Street Fighter, Tekken, all that fun stuff.
You're a tough guy. Okay, got it.
I like to think I am sometimes.
A digitally tough guy.
Yeah. Leave me in the comment section.
Okay, okay, I'm sorry. I'm just so like a gullible. I thought you were really fighting. Like,
No.
I felt the same. Yes.
MMA.
Yeah, don't fight in real life. I'm very soft. I'll fold like a lawn chair. Don't worry. Thank
No,
you.
but also, yes, I didn't realize you were talking about digital games. Sorry, Andrew.
Yes, online games. Online.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Andrew, you strike me as somebody who's really good at maybe de-escalating a situation, which I think is the greatest skill of all. But I mean that as a compliment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's the greatest skill of all because I think that in Western countries, because back home, I think that we have, it is part of our culture. We are fighters. And when there is a conflict, we do not try to de-escalate it. We try to actually escalate it so it's over in a shorter time, so that the problem is solved as soon as possible. And I think that nowadays, basically, we can see, it happens in politics and geopolitics, and it's not a good thing to go with, right? And I do appreciate people who have this de-escalation skill, who know how to approach a problem so that it is resolved without escalation. And as Tim said, yes, Andrew, you strike me as such a person, and it's wonderful to know.
The world needs more of de-escalators, and
Yes,
it seems like nobody wants to use diplomacy anymore. And that's very sad to me. I think we need more of us to fight for diplomacy.
yes,
I think just to sort of comment on that, I think the biggest thing that I've learned being an African American male in a completely opposite culture of my own, what I grew up in. I've been used to being othered and all that in the United States. So I guess it didn't really affect me as much as it did when I came here. But I think the biggest thing that I learned being in Japan and being a guest of this culture and having to learn it is that I think you should be slow to attribute to discrimination, xenophobia, indifference, what can't be attributed to a lack of understanding on either side. So when something happens, I'm like, okay, what in this conversation am I not understanding? And for something I feel like I'm not understanding, I'll ask for clarification. But also at the same time, I'm not so quick to be like, well, they're right all the time. Let's see where they're coming from. And then you try and meet in the middle. And that has saved me so many instances in my life. That has saved me where at the end of the day, we're not on the same page, or there was something that I didn't understand fully because, again, I'm not from here. So I don't really sometimes fully understand the logic that goes into these decisions. But once you understand the logic that goes into some of the decision makings, you can see, okay, I can see how you arrive to that conclusion. But also, here's what I think. And that's when you actually have a conversation. That's when you can actually meet in the middle and you can, sort of work through the issues that may be present. Because at the end of the day, like I've said before, we're all people at the end of the day. So we all want
I love.
for each
Thank
other.
you
Yeah.
for saying that.
So
I
being-
love that you said that. You
yeah.
know,
So
I
Yeah.
really appreciate that.
and
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I surf the web. I'm on REDDIT. I can't say it out loud, otherwise they'll hear me. But I'm on there and I see the comments, and they're like, X happened equals I didn't like it. It must be because I'm foreign. I was like, no.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Like, let's back up for a little bit. For example, I remember seeing this comment like years ago. It was like, I wasn't allowed on this train. They said it's only for Japanese people or something something to that effect. Why is Japan like this? Like, xenophobic, whatever. And I'm like, well, maybe if you like read like the description of how to buy the train tickets, that was like how it's for like certain they have like the JR rail pass, right? So you have like the stuff for tourists, and then you have the ticket for people who don't live here, like they don't get the benefit. That's what that difference was. It's the tourist ticket packet, which you probably had, and then there was a non-tourist ticket which you didn't have, which what the train was for. And it's like,
Right.
let's be. And it's a thing that we deal a lot with in the West, right? It's very easy to be like, something didn't happen. It must be because this person doesn't like me for who I am, and something that
We assume bad intentions, and that's
Exactly.
a really. I wonder why. I wonder why humans go there so quickly.
I don't know. But if we apply just a little bit of logic and try to apply a little bit of understanding,
Good for
you
you.
find that it's a very simple thing that we did not understand going into it, right? Something literally as simple as being, this is the tourist package. You don't have the tourist package, therefore you can't take the train. Like,
Yeah.
it would be a simple fix,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
But our
Yeah,
brains,
that's a
when
good
we go
example.
through it, our brains instantly jump to Japan's xenophobic or Japan's, discriminatory. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that doesn't exist at all, ever, right? I mean, I can point to, fortunately, I've only had one interaction in the 9 years where I've been here where I was like, oh, that's just racist. But more often than not, it's just a simple disconnect somewhere, and you have to be willing to find that. And that's going to be a very sometimes uncomfortable conversation of, what don't I understand?
Yeah.
Right? Or
Yeah.
what do they not understand about this situation, right? And again, we want to be right all the time, but again, being in this country is taught me more than anything, on top of being married, that sometimes I'm just wrong. It's like, you just be, you're sometimes we're loud and wrong. It happens. So
And
Yeah.
go ahead, Maya. Sorry.
Oh, no. I just wanted to say that, I mean, the human brain has been wired, through evolutionary or through evolution to see the bad things so that we can survive, right? We can actually either run away or fight. And maybe this is part of our first, system one thinking, that is the survival instinct. And I would say, Tim, because you said, I don't know why it happens, but there is a good book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. Yes, I think that it became quite popular, a couple of years ago. So
I read that too.
yeah, it explains
I read it
quite
myself too.
yes, quite a lot of the reasons why we assign bad intentions, right?
Yeah.
And also, it teaches us, just as Andrew said, that if the first instinctively we think something bad is happening, but then if you give it a thought, a couple of seconds, you discover that it's not exactly what it looks on the surface. It's
Right.
something deeper. And we need to accept the fact that we cannot be right all the time. And
Right.
not being right, finding, where is the problem, then it helps a lot. Not only us, but
Yeah.
everybody else. Sorry, Tim, just go ahead. Yeah.
No, and I don't want to equate my experiences with Andrew because it's different being a white guy here. But I think all foreigners in Japan have at some time felt othered to different degrees, right?
Yeah.
And there are different stereotypes applied to us. We're not, it's not all the same. But in my experience, I have found that most of the time, it's not malice. It's ignorance. It's ignorance, right? And
Yeah.
ignorance can be cured. We can connect with people. If I've come to viewing myself as an ambassador, and I don't want to fulfill a lot of the negative stereotypes that I know Japanese have about me. And I try to go in the opposite direction and be kind and be respectful and follow their rules and build connections. And I know both of you have done this. You can change people. You can open their hearts and minds and have your heart and mind opened in the process. So I think if you approach it in a positive way rather than an accusatory way, you actually have the power to change people and to change yourself in the process.
It's always just that sort of first sting. You're like, wait a minute. Oh, wait.
Right.
I can.
Yeah, right.
But you realize in that situation, you can bridge this gap. It's just comes from ignorance, just lack of not knowing, right? You have to believe that if they knew better, they would do better. So you have to bring that sort of knowledge to them. Hey, this is what this means. Hey, this is where I come from. Hey, this is sort of like what this means to me. Okay. And we all make mistakes, right? We all fall short. And I'm not saying I'm not one of those people too, right? It's just, you have to be willing to bridge that gap when you get to it. So
yeah.
I have one example that just was very heartwarming to me. So in 2010, my son and his best friend in high school, Babatunji Johnson, a Black American, came to Japan and they visited Atami. And my son and his friend are both hip hop, b-boy dancers. And by the way, Babatunji now is a world famous modern jazz dancer. He's traveled the world around, right? So we were in our living room, very small living room. And my wife's uncle and aunt came over and they had never met a Black person before, ever. Right. And they asked my son and Babatunji to dance. Somewhere I got it on video. And they danced. And by the end of their dance, both of them were crying. In tears of like joy, and they both hugged him. And I thought, wow, what a powerful moment. We need more of this, in the world. So that was kind of my inspiration. Wow, we can all be ambassadors, we can do it in our own way, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think being yourself, I would say not necessarily in spite of, but in this context, it will actually behoove you more than trying to fit completely into that box, right? It's because we've broken the mold, to speak, that we can bring something new and, show people some things that have not, that they've never seen before. So yeah, I think whether, by hook or crook or whether we mean it or not, we are ambassadors and we do have to be mindful of that every day. And that's kind of something I carry in my head as well.
Well, Andrew, I am so glad you were on our show today. I love talking to people like you who really come in with an open mind and are very thoughtful. And I think you add a lot to, Japan by you being here. So, thank you. And Maya, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think you had something to say. Maybe you want to close it out.
No, I wanted to say that this goes, for every country, that people, when you're a foreigner in other country, any country, it happens there as well. And also I wanted to read, a comment from Deborah. So she's got another way, of actually getting into the local community and having people to talk with her. So she writes, I will say that getting a dog enabled all the people in my neighborhood to talk with me and welcome me to the neighborhood. Walking the dog opened more doors than I could have imagined. And my dogs are very popular, so I'm always meeting people, male and female, old and young, who want to hang with my four-legged family. People even pop over to say hello and hang with us. And yes, it is just another wonderful way to connect with people.
That's all right.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so great. And Andrew, I second everything that Tim said. Thank you so very much for agreeing to be our speaker. Yes, Yuka, thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Yes. Yes. Well, that would be lovely. So, and we can decide, on the time and the date and so on. So thanks a lot, Andrew. Thank you to everybody who stayed with us, who chimed in with comments. Timothy, thank you very much. Yuka, to you. If you haven't seen that comment, Timothy wrote, Yuka, you should shout louder so that you're heard.
Okay, yeah. Well, wait till Sunday morning, Timothy. Okay, yeah, your wish
Okay.
will be realized. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Anyway, thank you, Andrew. You
Yeah.
had the last part it's especially great. I think it's everybody should listen to the at least last 10 minutes of this recording. Thank you. Maybe
yes.
15.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Yes, and just one more thing, Yuka, you helped me realize that too. On LinkedIn, if you want to receive notifications for the podcasts, you need to hit attend so that the LinkedIn algorithm will send you automatic notifications. If you don't do that, LinkedIn has made it difficult to find anybody's post. So yes, be aware of this. And if you're interested in the topics, hit attend, and it will be easier for you to find us on the day or even later. Okay, and that's all for today. I wish you a happy midweek and a productive reminder of the week as well. Connect with Andrew on LinkedIn if you haven't connected with him yet. So he's there, Andrew James, and you can hit it from there. Okay, thanks a lot again.
Thank
That's
you,
all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.